Story of courage from one of us, one of our own members. David Stephan of True Hope is in the circle. He barely made it to this Congress when the Crown of Canada held him for an hour and a half at the Inquisition at the airport, knowing what his time of flight was, and let him go 2 minutes before the plane took off. He missed his flight, but he came the following day. So we have him, and we're honored to have him. He's going to talk about his family's latest battle. But let me give you a context from where he comes. David Stephan and his family are no strangers to controversy. His family's company, True Hope, promoting natural solutions for mental illness that results in thousands of individuals becoming medication-free to achieve a greater quality of life, suffered vicious attacks by Health Canada after being raided in 2003. A decade-long battle resulted in a victory for health freedom. Fast forward to 2016, when David and his wife Colette were convicted in Canada for failing to provide the necessaries of life for their son Ezekiel, who died under the care of Alberta Emergency Services. The Crown tried to set a precedent for parents who don't vaccinate their children and actually changed the law in order to convict them. The verdicts were appealed, and in May of this year, a panel of 7 Supreme Court judges unanimously ruled in favor that the initial judge erred in law, resulting in a wrongful conviction. On May 14th, David's case was thrown out and he was allowed to cross the US-Canadian border to be able to be here. He celebrated his 35th birthday with us yesterday. With media continuing to lie about David and the recent ruling, David uses Facebook to keep his thousands of loyal supporters connected to the truth. His supporters have become the mainstream, so much so that the government gets its news from David's posts. How does David face persecution under such grace? Let's hear his story of courage. Please welcome David Stephan.
Thank you so much, Roseanne. I appreciate that. I'm here. I didn't think I would get here, but though it wasn't as mighty as the parting of the Red Seas, it was a miracle nonetheless. And how it started off was, I ended up in customs. My passport had been flagged, and that was after the Crown had decided that they were going to schedule the hearing to begin the court proceedings again for yesterday. And they tried to summons me to court, but my lawyers told them, no, he doesn't need to be in court. So then I went across the border, and sure enough, my passport was flagged, and I was pulled off into a room where I was notified I would not be able to come into US until the court proceedings were done. And so I was anticipating it'd be a few years. But within about 45 minutes, they came back, but about 2 minutes too late. And so I didn't make it. And so I caught the flight the next day, and here I am. Now I do a little bit of speaking. I actually do a little bit of touring in Canada when the media isn't on my back and creating such a controversy that my presentations get canceled. But anybody who knows me knows that it's a hard thing to bridle me into a time slot of even an hour, so I'm not sure if I'm going to make a half-hour work here, but I'll do my best. May 15th, 2018. I'm driving from Ottawa at about 11 a.m. in the morning, coming from Ottawa to Kingston, Ontario, in this state of elation. For the first time in a couple of years, I no longer had the label of being a criminal. And in that moment, this statement hit me. Though the battle be won, the war has just begun. And it took me back, and I realized that it wasn't over with. And it's not over with for any of us. This is warfare that we're engaged in. This is truly a battle against good and evil. And I'm hoping that something I shared today may be of value to those who are going throughout this. That it may assist you while you go through that warfare, while you navigate through that. That you can do so in such a way that it doesn't destroy you. Because growing up with my father being an activist, not just with True Hope, but with Canada Revenue Agency, which is similar to the IRS here in the US, and talking about other health issues as well, or government issues. I've come across a lot of advocates, and I've seen how many times the war burns them out. And there's been a few things that my wife and I have discovered that has really assisted us through this, and so hopefully I can share something of value there. But going into it, this being a story of courage, I don't know much about courage. I don't. When I go online and I take a look at it, I see all these quotes from people like Mark Twain, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. What I see is I see the discussion of courage, not being the absence of fear, but being somehow able to navigate through the fear, having that fear within us and yet pushing through. Now, when I reflect back on my life, that to me sounds reckless. And it's not to go against anything that these great leaders have gone through and shown the way. But my understanding of fear, when I take a look back, any time that I have acted out of fear, any time, I can reflect back and say that was a great learning lesson. After I look at the turmoil and the chaos and the destruction that it created. Does not fear lead to anger? And anger into hatred and violence and all those things that we're trying to avoid? I've come to learn something else, and this isn't a story about courage. This is more of a story about just a regular individual, a husband, a father, learning how to love. Learning how to love and actually put that into action. 5 years ago, I didn't really know how to love. After the loss of my son, that was really a wake-up call for me. And it brought stuff to the surface that I didn't even know existed. I probably went numb after my mother had taken her life when I was at the age of 10 years old. After she got on a prescription for Prozac, and 2 weeks later took her own life. And so, it was through the passing of my son that I began to have this awakening. And I began to actually become the husband and father that I needed to be. And a much better human being. And though I'm a work in progress and I have a long distance to go, it's been an interesting process. And there's a passage that meant nothing to me 5 years ago, but today means almost everything to me. Is that love. Sorry. There is no fear in love. There is no fear in love. But perfect love casteth out all fear. And I'm here to tell you, in those moments that I have felt that perfect love, though I do not retain it all the time, it is a journey. When I look at you, and I realize that my being here hopefully is of service, and that it's a work of love, the fear dissipates. It's no longer about me. It's no longer about my performance. It's no longer at all about anything to do with me or my shortcomings. Perfect love casteth out all fear. And so I don't know how to navigate through fear, not without creating disruption and turmoil and chaos. I can take a look back at a lot of things in my life, and that's always where it leads. Before I get into my story, oftentimes I get the question, me and my wife both get the question, how do you do it? How is it that you can go through this and still keep your head up high? I had a hard time for quite some time there when the media caught us off guard and suddenly we're making international headlines. And who it was talking about had nothing to do with us. It was a depiction that vaguely resembled us, but it was such a distorted version of us. And I had a hard time with that at first. And I had a hard time with the ridicule. But I came to recognize that my life doesn't depend on what somebody else feels about me. I just need to be the best person I can be. But in being able to keep our heads high, and being able to push through, to persevere, and to do so still in that spirit of love, there's a slogan that is really kind of the beginning of it. And some of you will recognize the slogan. We must be free to maintain health. We must be healthy to maintain freedom. Does anybody recognize that slogan? When I saw that in one of the emails from the National Health Freedom Coalition, that was their slogan, I thought, wow, how interesting is that? How true is that? We must be healthy to maintain freedom. It's funny because I was actually reflecting upon this over the last few months and realized that if it wasn't for my knowledge of nutrition, I wouldn't be here. Not just here, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be present. I wouldn't be standing up. We must be healthy. And when we are healthy, at least for me, it allowed a space to be created where I could feel peace and tranquility and still keep that deep connection with the divine, with my Creator, with my God. And that was so important. It put everything in perspective. And yet, when I wasn't healthy, when I slacked on it, the darkness would come flooding in. And so the work that we're engaged in today is extremely important. Don't ever underestimate the role that your health plays in your being able to stand up for truth and freedom. It is the most important thing to keep you going in the right direction. Do you think the powers that be underestimate the effect that your health has on being able to stand up in the battle for freedom? No, they don't. Why do you think it is that they're poisoning the air, the water, the food? That they're convincing people under the guise of boosting immunity to actually inject these toxins into them that compromise their health and well-being? Why do you think it is that they're bombarding us with these negative frequencies? It's to compromise our ability. Do you really think it has anything to do with money? It's to compromise our ability to fight for freedom. It comes down to that age-old battle against liberty. That's what it comes down to. On an interesting note, there was a study done on some of the supplements, the True Hope supplements, on ADHD. And just to further substantiate the effects that it has on people, proper nutrition. It wasn't the fact that these children with ADHD were recovering, and that their focus was improving, that their school grades were improving, that caught me off guard. It was the fact that within the study, it also illustrated the effect that it was having on these people within their houses, within their homes. How these young children who are emotionally disconnected and appeared to be an annoyance to their siblings and to their parents became sentimental and loving. It is so crucial that we maintain our well-being so that we can maintain that space of love and peace and be able to move forward in that spirit. Otherwise, all we do is we create destruction. March 2012. Our son had been off and on sick for about 2 weeks. Croup, got over it, went back to preschool, went back to church, and then started to develop the early onset symptoms of the flu. At least is what it looked like. Waxed and waned. Nothing of significance, no fever, no vomiting, nothing that would alarm a parent to say, hey, you need to take your child into the emergency room. Tuesday, March 13th, after about noon, he starts to become more playful, and the symptoms subside. He goes down for a nap in the late afternoon, my wife goes to a church activity that she wasn't going to go to originally, but because of his progress, we figured that he would be up and running around the next day. He wakes up from his nap and starts to develop a new set of symptoms. Suddenly he's got some breathing issues that are more curious than anything, nothing alarming like the croup was, a couple weeks before during the first day of him having croup. And before we had a chance to figure out what was going on, my wife had come back from the church activity. He went into respiratory arrest, stopped breathing, and we ended up going to the hospital with him. It was an extreme traumatic situation for everybody involved. And after 5 days, they pulled him off life support. We had no idea what had taken place. And though so many people saw it as a traumatic event, there were some who saw it as an opportunity. It was like the perfect opportunity laid out on a silver platter for them. An opportunity where they could attack religion, where they could attack parental rights, where they could backdoor mandatory vaccines by setting a legal precedent in the courts that if you didn't vaccinate as a parent, you could be held criminally liable if anything happened to your child. That was vaccine preventable. They used it, or saw it as an opportunity to attack naturopathy, homeopathy, and True Hope, the company I'm involved in. And ultimately set the stage for the ushering out of a new set of regulations through Health Canada by creating such disdain within Canada towards naturopathy and homeopathy. But it came with a hitch. You see, in an effort to save a few dollars, the Alberta health system didn't properly stock their ambulances. And my son went over 8 minutes without oxygen within an ambulance. And they would have to cover that up somehow. So 9 months later, we have an autopsy report that's been falsified, 2 causations of death that were later disproven, both of them. No scientific evidence to back them up. But what it did is it created this narrative that the media continues on with. A narrative that they could push forward, saying he had bacterial meningitis and he had a right pleural empyema, which is a well-developed lung infection or infection on the outer wall of the lung within the pleural cavity. And how it would be symptomatic and any parent should have been able to pick up on that. And yet he didn't have those symptoms. And then they also had to withhold all of the medical evidence that disproved that autopsy. And so there was a carefully crafted cover-up to this so that they could move forward with what they thought was an ideal case to set all of these precedences within Canada. And the media was complicit in it. When the evidence came out in court, they refused to report the truth. And as such, it created a division. A huge division. We had families reaching out to us, people messaging us saying, can you please stop putting this stuff out on Facebook? It's creating a controversy within our family. You know what they're really asking? Is please stop telling the truth because it goes against the huge lie that I so desperately want to believe. They didn't want to hear the truth, many of them. And it was a topic that they didn't want to be discussing around Thanksgiving dinner. Talking about the Stephan family because it was pulling people apart. Because the contrast between the truth and the deception was so stark. It was creating division everywhere. Society as a whole really was split. The natural health community was split. There was many that were wanting to distance themselves from me and my family, even though we had deep roots in the natural health community. It even began to split the anti-vax community. It was splitting the Crown prosecution. There were Crown prosecutors that I was made aware of that heard about the situation and knew that it was bogus and knew that the media was lying. So even the Crown prosecution themselves were divided. And when I ended up in jail, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, when I ended up in jail, 3 weeks after arriving, the DDO, Deputy Director of Operations, sat me down to release me. And he said, you know, this is a real shame. When I heard that you were coming to jail, I just thought, this is wrong. Here we have real criminals in here, and you are coming to jail. And he says, in the 22 years I've been here, I've never seen this. Never. My staff are split over you. He says, half of them want to bake a cake for you and bring it in. And he says, on the other half, he was lost for words. He said, want to bake me in a cake? Yeah, he starts laughing. Yeah. Even the jail was split. It split everybody because the truth versus the deception was split completely. There was no gray. It was either you believe the lies full-heartedly, and they were huge lies, and they were being told so frequently, taking the play right out of Hitler's handbook. Tell the absurd lie, tell it so often, and it'll be accepted as the truth. Versus what the truth actually was, which we didn't even know going into court. And to this day, we don't even have the whole truth yet. Although there has been a lot of evidence that's been uncovered, and we've discovered there's a lot of evidence that's destroyed as well. But it brings me to a passage that I think is relevant to the situation that we have before us. It's not said that every kingdom that is divided against itself is brought into desolation. Every city and house that is divided against itself shall fall. Has society enjoyed for far too long the seasons of spring and summer, that we are now going into fall? That the fall is coming? For some of us, we may look at that actually as a good thing. For some of us, we don't want to see the organization of tyranny and for it to flourish. But who is it that rises out of the desolation that comes from the long winter that precedes that fall? It is those who have learned to endure all things through the Spirit of love. It is those who rise up victorious, regardless of the chaos that ensues because of the way that society is going, and the collapse that will take place because of the division, because of those who are moving forward in truth versus those who accept the lie. When I went to jail, it was perhaps the most liberating experience I've ever had, which just seems so ironic. Liberation found in jail, but it was. Because so many of my fears dissipated at that moment, the fear of the unknown. And I began to see the truth. I began to actually know the truth of who I am, and the truth of who every one of you are. Did not the Christ say, if ye continue in my word, then ye are my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And what this truth was that I began to come to the realization of is this: ye are God's, and are all children of the Most High. I want that to sink in just for a moment here. It's perhaps one of the most profound truths that we can come to terms with. I want you to close your eyes just for a moment here. And just visualize this. Ye, you, are a God and are a child of the Most High. Does that at all change your perception of yourself? Is there any room for feelings of insignificance when you come to terms with that? That you are a child of the divine. You are here for a reason. You were created with purpose. And I want you to, if you haven't already, open your eyes and look at everybody around you. They are God's. And they are children of the Most High. Does that change your perspective of those around you? It did for me. It did for me. And when I began to come to that realization, my fears were dissipated, my confidence soared. And I came to recognize it didn't matter where I was, what I was doing, that I'm a child of God. And when I was in jail, those bars didn't keep him out. I started to no longer be a slave to my passions, to my emotions, my fears, and ultimately to my circumstances. I started to become free. The truth will set you free. It's my sincere prayer that we all come to know who we truly are. That we come to see those that we come in contact with, regardless of whether they stand for us or against us. Whether they are for perpetrating the darkness, the things that are harming our children, that are harming our families, that are harming society as a whole, that sits there to take down the liberties of the nation. That we see them also as children of God. For that's when forgiveness comes and anger dissipates. Is when we begin to recognize everybody just like we recognize ourselves. We begin to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we have love for ourselves because we know who we are. That is what I found to bring the peace that's allowed me to continue to stand against great opposition, hatred and vitriol being spewed, death threats. It doesn't matter. It's my sincere prayer that we come to know that we come to truly know the truth, and that we are freed through it. And that as we do so, that we rise up in that spirit of love that comes from it. And that we stand firmly for truth and for freedom. And may the victory be ours. Thank you.